Hello and welcome to the Daslight video tutorials. This is Simon Bennett and today I'm going to be speaking about scenes. So I'm going to be creating groups and scenes. I'm going to show you how you can manipulate scenes and steps, and I'm going to dive into some of the more advanced scene properties as well. So if you haven't checked out the introduction tutorial, I'd advise you head over there and just check that out first, as it gives you a great overview of the whole Daslight software, and then come back and I'll show you some of the more advanced features here. So I've just got an empty show. I'm going to patch some moving heads. I'm going to put 8 moving heads just like before. And I'm going to dive into the editor tab, which is just here under the patch. Okay, so as we saw in the introduction tutorial, scenes are listed in columns. So we can create a new scene here. We can give it a name. So we could call this one Rainbow. And scenes are also inside groups. So to create a new group, we can click here. So for example, group 1 could perhaps be color effects. And group 2 could be beam effects. So a typical kind of scene you could have as a beam effect could be beam on. So the scene properties are over here on the right. I can call this beam on. And I can go ahead and press the beam on button, which is just down here. So as we see on the left, this has set the iris, the zoom, and the dimmer intensity. So we can actually see a light beam. And if I go over to my color effects, we could set a color. Let's say cyan. Then we could create a new step. We can go over to magenta and then create another new step. And go on to yellow. Now we can preview a step just here preview a scene just here by pressing play. So these steps have a hold time of 1 second. Now notice that we can see something going on here on the left, but we can't see anything going on here on the right. And that's because the dimmer's currently closed and the shutter's currently closed. So what we need to do is to actually switch our beam on scene on. So if we just press play here, there we go. So now these two scenes are playing together. So what I often do is when I'm creating a show, I'll create a beam on button like this. I'll press play just to make sure that dimmer and shutter and iris and everything else is all set how I want it. And then I'll go ahead and start building up my color effects and position effects and different bits and pieces here. So as we saw before, you can fade a step just by double clicking on it and setting a fade time here. You can fade several steps at once. So if I wanted to select all these steps, I could select step 1, hold shift, and select step 3. If I set, let's say, a fade time of 4 seconds. All my steps are now 4 seconds, so if I play this, you can see the colors fade in here. There are a few other options in the steps window. So we've got this one here. This opens the time settings window. Now this is pretty similar to what we were doing before, but it just allows you to basically affect the fade time and the hold time of all the steps at once. This is a little bit easier sometimes than holding shift and control to select multiple steps. So I can say all steps, I want a fade time of 3 seconds and a hold time of 2 seconds. Then I can hit OK, and all these steps will be set to 3 seconds and 2 seconds. So it holds for 2 seconds, fades for 3 seconds, holds for 2 seconds, fades for 3 seconds, etc. So if we go over here into the properties, I'm going to explain some of the other options that are available for each scene. So up here we've got the scene name, which we've seen before. This button just clears the scene name. If we didn't want to see a particular scene in live, we could click here and it would hide it in live. we've got the scene color here. Normally I suggest you just keep the default scene colors because Daslight automatically colors the scenes depending on the groups, and if you start changing the colors it can get a little bit confusing, but there are some situations where it's useful to have a specific color, so you can select from one of Daslight's special colors here. Then we can go into the loops section. So what the loop section will do is repeat the scene. So I'm just going to make this scene a bit quicker actually, just so I can show you without having to wait 20 seconds every time. Okay, so right now this lasts 3, 6, 9 seconds. So we can see it's fading here, and then it goes back to the beginning. If you look carefully, you can see that the steps are actually selected as the scene's playing. So this is going to loop indefinitely. It's just going to keep going blue, green, and it's just going to keep changing between the colours. Now, if I uncheck always loop, I then have a little 1. Now this actually means it's going to play one time. It doesn't mean it's going to loop one time. So it plays from the start to the end, and then when it gets to the end of the scene, it stops, and the scene is released because this release at end is selected. An easier way to show you is on the live screen. So if I just go to live and click this rainbow, it goes through the 3 steps, and then it's released. We see this is released here. If we didn't have this release at end selected, it would actually pause on the last step. So if we just go back to live, play the rainbow, it's going to play 3 colours, but this time it's going to pause on the last step. There we go. So you see, instead of it jumping back to 0, 0, 0, which is white on a moving head, it's in fact paused on the last step, which is yellow. And we can loop several times. So instead of looping once, perhaps we want to loop twice. So now if we go to live, trigger this, it's going to play once, it's going to play twice, and then it's going to release, or it's going to freeze on the last step. Next we've got the jump to button. So what this will do is jump to another scene. So if we just stop this scene a second, let's create a scene here. Let's create a scene called green. And this just sets a static green color. Now imagine I want my rainbow to play twice and then jump to the green scene. So what we do is we go jump to, and we can select green just here. So if I now go back to the live screen, I'm going to press this, it's going to play twice. I should have made this a bit quicker. Almost there. And then it's going to jump over to the green scene. And you see this is looping indefinitely. You can see this bar filling up and looping back round, and that's going to stay on green forever until something else happens. So that's basically how the jump to works. Something which is really cool actually with the jump to in Daslight 4 is that you can jump to several scenes at once. So for example, imagine I've got some RGB lights. So I'll just patch some RGBs. I'll add 4. So here I have my 4 RGB lights. I'll just move them down there. Now imagine I've got another group now called RGB effects, and maybe I've got a step where they're red, pink, blue, and I'm going to set a faster hold time for these. Oops. Okay, something like this. So what I can do after my rainbow effects played, I'm just going to change the loops to 1 so I can show you a little bit more quickly. I can jump to the green scene, but also the RGB effects scene. So I'm going to press OK. go to the live. I'm going to play my rainbow effect. There it is, playing on the moving heads. And then you see it's jumped to the green and it started playing my RGB effects as well. And this is a really neat way of being able to trigger two scenes from one scene. We get asked for this a lot in Daslight. Imagine you've got two different effects playing on two different types of lights and you want to trigger both those effects at the same time with a single mouse click. Now, in a scene in Daslight, it's only possible to have a single list of steps. You can't have several columns of steps, you can't run several effects at once. But a nice way to do this is to actually create different scenes with different effects, and then you could have a special group called, for example, Qs. And you could call this one Q1. You could call this one Q2. So imagine, let me just remove this jump from here just so we don't get confused. So I'll just clear all this off. Okay, so imagine when I press Q1, I want to trigger the beam on and the green. So I can take always loop off. I'll change the hold time just to the minimum, which is 4 milliseconds. And I can go jump to green and beam on. So if I now go over to live, I'll just switch everything off. When I press here, bam, these both start at the same time. Then maybe Q2, I want to trigger the rainbow and the RGB effects scene. I should give this a name. Scene's not very interesting, is it? Let's call this flashy colors. Notice I am spelling colors the American way here. I get stopped all the time because I'm English and everyone says, where's the U in colors? But I should do it the American way. It's apparently the world standard. Okay, so we got the Q2 here. And I'm going to trigger the rainbow and the flashy colors. So I remove always loop because I don't want this to loop. I just want it to jump straight to these two scenes. I'm going to change the hold time to 4 milliseconds, just like before. That's the shortest time a scene can be, by the way. And the reason it's 4 milliseconds is because 4 milliseconds is a DMX frame. I call it 4 milliseconds. In fact, it's 40 milliseconds. It's 4/100ths of a second if you really want to be precise about it. And that's 1/25th of a second because there are 25 frames a second in DMX. So if I select this jump to button here, I'm going to select rainbow and flashy colors. I'm going to hit OK. So now when I go over to the live screen again, when I click this, I've got rainbow flashy colors. When I've got this, I've got green and beam on. I've still got flashy colors because I never stopped it. So that's a quick way of being able to jump to different scenes, create your own little cue lists, things like that. What some people do is they will create a group called like disco scenes, and they might create a list of all different kinds of effects, and they might want to loop each effect, let's say 20 times. So maybe each effect's going to last like, I don't know, 15 minutes or something like this. And then after 15 minutes, they will jump to the next effect. By the way, you can change a property of several scenes at once by multi-selecting. So if you hold Control or Command, I can select 3 scenes just like this. I can say 20 loops. And you see it's going to select 20 loops for all these scenes at once. So it's a nice quick way to change a lot of scenes at the same time. And then instead of actually selecting a scene, you can just say next scene. Makes it a little bit easier. So we can go like this, jump to next scene. Jump to next scene. I don't know if I can do this with the multi-selection. Let me try. Yeah, there we go. So now when I go over to live, Obviously all these scenes are just empty at the moment and they just last 1 second. But I can press the first scene and it's going to loop 20 times. So we just need to wait 20 seconds here. Okay, there we go. And then it jumps to the next, and it will carry on. It will loop 20 times, jump to the next, the next, the next. We've got these handy little buttons here as well, where we can manually jump between scenes as well. So if you're getting bored of your scene and you want to jump to something else, you can just click that, and then it will go ahead and jump to the next scene. So that's basically the scene jumping. We're moving down, so release mode. This is sometimes a bit of a tricky concept to grasp at the beginning, but it's really powerful. What you may have realized, if we just go back to the live mode here, when I click a scene, if I click another scene in the group, it's going to automatically release the scene before. So if I click this one's going to disappear. If I click this one's going to disappear. And that is because the release mode is set to group. So that means when you click a button, it's going to release all the other scenes in the same group. I'll just make a few more groups to more easily demonstrate. Okay. So if I click a scene here, then if I click a scene here, they'll play at the same time because they're in different groups. But then if I click this scene, it's going to stop that scene, and it's because it's in the same group. And that's because the release mode is set to group. Now if I go back to edit, I can change the release mode of a scene. So let's go for this scene here. I'll change the release mode from group to off. And let's do it for all these scenes in this group actually. Notice that off's written in red here. That's because this one's set to off and these are set to group, so they've got different settings. And when the settings are different of a multi-selection, Daslight will write it in red. So if I go to off, maybe I need to do this. Okay, there we go. So now all the scenes are set to off. So now, if I play this scene, if I play this one, it's not releasing this anymore, it's actually stacking it on top. So you can actually stack scenes like this, which is really powerful if, say, maybe you want some different types of effects in the same group. So for example, maybe instead of group 3 here, maybe I want to call this, let's call this heads. So this has all my moving head effects in, and maybe this one I want to have my beam on. So this is where we had the beams on before. Then maybe this one I want color red, and then this one maybe I want to have gobo. Now I want these on at the same time. Let me just set these. So there I've got my red. Then for my gobo, let's choose this fan. Okay, so if I go to live, I actually want to be able to play these at the same time. I want to be able to put my beam on, I want to be able to set my color to red, and I want to be able to set my gobo. Now, this isn't working because when I click another scene, it releases the previous one. So if I go back to the edit mode, if I do a multi-selection here, and select the release mode to off, then go back to live, I can now stack these together. So I can easily make a red fan gobo in the same group. So off basically doesn't automatically release anything else. It will allow you to stack scenes within the same group. Then we've got a few other options. So next we've got the general release. Now general is useful if you want to release all the other buttons in the show when you trigger the scene. This is useful for like master buttons. So for example, I'm going to create another group. I'll call this group master scenes, and maybe I want to make a scene called all off, Or no, let's call it reset all. Reset all. So this will reset all the other scenes. And at the moment, everything is 0 in this scene. See 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And if I select general, what this is going to do is release all the other scenes in the show. So if I go back to live, so I might have beam on, I might have that in red, I might have my flashy colors playing. I just want to release everything. So when I press this, bam, everything's released and everything's set to 0. So that's called general release. After that, we've got the group release. So that's the default setting. So it just releases the other scenes in the group. And then we've got another one called all except group. So that will release all of the scenes in the show except for the scenes within the actual group. There are some uses for that. I've not found one myself yet, but some customers do find that useful. So we've got off, where it just stacks everything. We've got general, where it releases everything. We've got group, which is the default, where it will release all of the scenes within the group. And then we've got all except group, where it will release all of the scenes in the show, except for the scenes which are in the same group. Now, I'll mention now that you can actually set up your own default settings. So for those of you who've been using Daslight a little longer, I think in Daslight 2, the default was off, and in Daslight 3, the default was general. Or perhaps it was the other way around. If you prefer to always have general release as your default release mode, you can actually press this little star here. And what that's going to do is it's going to set all these as your default properties when you create a new scene. So if you automatically want to generate a new scene, when you press this plus and it's set to general, I can go general, I can press the star here, and now when I create a new scene, it automatically uses general instead of group. I prefer group, so I'm going to set that back to group. So that's the release mode. Moving on, so we then got the flash mode. Flash mode's quite self-explanatory. Basically, it activates the scene when you put your mouse down, and it releases the scene when you put your mouse up. This is the same for keyboard and MIDI shortcuts and things like that. So, for example, let's say I want my lights on, and I want to set it to flash mode. If I go over to live, press this, the lights come on, I release the button, the lights go off. So you can create quick flashes like so. It's very easy to create a flash mode button. Next we've got fade. So imagine we've got some different colors, and then when you activate the scene, you want the color to fade in. You can select a fade in and a fade out time. So if we go over to color effects, let's switch that beam on button on again so we can see what's going on. So let's create a new scene called blue. Then another scene called, let's say, yellow. Just make sure that's switched on down there. That's always important, by the way. We'll explain that in another video, but it's really important that the lights you want to use, even if the value is 0, if you want to use it in the scene, you need to make sure it's switched on. Otherwise, it's going to be ignored completely. Okay, so we've got our blue and we've got our yellow. Now, if we set a fade in time with the yellow of 4 seconds. Now, if we go to live, we've got blue playing. If we press yellow, it's going to fade into yellow over 4 seconds. So that's the scene fading. We've then got triggers, which we will talk about later, but basically you can trigger a scene by MIDI, keyboard, DMX, or port trigger. And then finally under this we've got the audio. So the audio allows you to add an MP3 or WAV file to the scene, and you can set a fade in and a fade out. So this is useful in theatre environments if you just want to play a little jingle when you trigger a lighting cue. So for example, you could add a jingle to a little scene here, or you could create an entirely different group, call this jingles, Kingles. And then you could have like thunder. Slam the door. Scream. I don't know what kind of show we're planning here, but there you go. And then you could assign your various jingle files over to that. So that's basically all the scene properties in Daslight, and in the next tutorial we're going to look into creating effects, and we're going to dive into all these different kinds of effects: curve, pan tilt, pixel, matrix, etc. So I will see you then.